The movie begins in New York in the 1930s where Dr. Vargas asks a waiter to deliver a parcel to another passenger on the blimp known as Walter that must be delivered as soon as they reach port. Polly, a journalist for a top newspaper, gets a package with information about the next kidnapping victims. She quickly returns to her office and tells her editor, Morris, about it. However, Morris cautions her because 6 scientists have gone missing, and he doesn't want her involved. Polly reassures him and goes to the theater, where she encounters Dr. Jennings, an anxious elderly man who is afraid of everything. Polly tells Dr. Jennings that he hinted at knowing who would disappear next. Dr. Jennings reveals that the 7 missing scientists were based in Berlin and forced to do awful things. As the city alarms sound, Dr. Jennings tries to leave quickly, but Polly catches up with him and asks who is next. He informs her that he is the only scientist remaining before vanishing into the bustling crowd. When she runs outside, Polly sees dozens of fighter planes and robots covering the sky. Trying to get a better image, Polly runs out into the street and continues to take pictures of her story. Flying around the city, the Sky Captain bombs the legs of the robots, halting their motion and all the others. When they see the roads are closed, the robots start transmitting a signal to each other and fly away from the vicinity. For the next few days, the news goes wild about the sophisticated machines burrowing out of the ground and uncovering mechanical mills all around the world. After his consistent strange endeavors, Sky Captain returns to his base to investigate what has been happening. The dismantled giant robot had been brought down to the base so the scientists could have a look at it. Dex, the lead researcher on the base, sees the robot being dragged in and gets excited. Sky Captain, who is also known as Joe, asks Dex to find out all he can about where the machine came from. After his conversation with Dex, Joe heads up to his office and is surprised by Polly, who had been waiting for him in the dark. Angry at her for allegedly sabotaging his plane years ago and making him spend 6 months in a Manchurian slave camp, Joe tells her to get out. Polly carelessly explains that she had never tried to sabotage him but knew that he had been cheating on her the whole time they were together. Both denying the allegations, Polly shows him the blueprint she had found of the giant robots and tells him that he would only get it if he gave her a great story to publish. Giving up on the fighting, Joe calls Dex to his office and together they take her to one of the huge warehouses where 3 other giant robots are standing. Dex tells her that these machines had started appearing around the world 3 years ago. The robots would show up out of nowhere, take what they needed, and disappear without a trace. Polly tells the men that she had discovered what she believed was an important name in the investigation, Totenkopf. Although Polly had contacted all of her sources, all she could find about Totenkopf was that he ran some secret project outside of Berlin known as Unit 11. She shows them a picture and tells them that the insignia the man used matched all of the ones on the machines. Agreeing that it would be best to work together, Polly and Joe head down to Dr. Jennings' lab. Inside, they find the lab wrecked and realize someone must have taken the scientist. While looking around, they see an elephant trapped in a tiny glass box and are both confused as to how it was possible to shrink such a giant animal. In the far corner of the room, they see Dr. Jennings on the floor and hurry toward him. While he tells them that they must stop him, Joe hears something from the other room and goes to check it out. Inside, he sees someone crouching on the floor looking for something before noticing Joe and hurrying outside the window just after attempting to shoot Joe with a laser. Before he passes away from the severe injury he had sustained, Dr. Jennings tells her to find them to prevent the world from ending. Polly is confused by what she must find and is even more curious about the 2 small metal cylinders Had is holding in his hand. Hearing the alarms blare outside, Joe and Polly head back to the base, her curious nature hiding what she had found from him. At the base, Joe is informed that dozens of flying objects have been picked up by the radars heading their way. As soon as the information reaches Joe, they see the sky full of flying machines that start firing on the planes and combative guns all around the base. Taking Polly with him, Joe gets into his plane and starts firing on the flying machines. While they fly across the city to buy Dex enough time to track down where the signal is coming from, Dex is attacked by robots and taken captive. When Joe and Polly return to the base, they find it almost completely destroyed and their friend gone. Polly is confused by the reason for Dex's kidnapping, and Joe tells her that they must have been looking for something. Perhaps they had felt threatened that Dex had almost found out where the transmissions were coming from. When Joe looked up at one of the collapsed ceilings, he realized Dex had left him a clue of a map stuck on bubble gum, leading them to where they would be able to find the signal source. After getting back on the plane and beginning their journey to the place indicated on the map, Polly goes through the back they had found in Dr. Jennings' lab and finds the journal belonging to Totenkopf. She explains that the man had been a genius, receiving 2 doctorates by the age of 17, and was one of the highest regarded minds of his day. A year after Totenkopf's disappearance, rumors started circulating that he was building a doomsday device. Even less was known about his companion, an assassin who controlled his machines. Polly also finds shopping logs for all the materials he had acquired to build the machines. After flying for hours, Joe and Polly finally make it to Nepal, where they meet Joe's friend, Kaji, in his camp. Joe asks Kaji if he has found the maps he had asked for, and when the man confirms, he hands his friend a case of sausages he had asked for. As Kaji walks off with his case to one of the tents, asking them to follow him, Polly tells Joe that she doesn't trust the man. Inside the tents, Joe compares the map Dex left him with the one Kaji had provided and finds the place. When he asks the man what was in that area, Kaji explains that it was a forbidden place, and it is said that strange Tibetans live with superhuman powers. Kaji continues to explain that the place was protected by priests who would kill them if they caught them because the area was considered Eden. Kaji informs them that a storm is coming, so if they wish to venture deep up the mountains, they must start their journey immediately. After Polly sends a message to her editor informing him of where they are headed, she and Joe, as well as Kaji and his crew, begin their journey. The group travels for hours and finally reaches a large abandoned mining outpost. Heading inside the place, they start to look around while Polly takes pictures. Joe checks the mine for radiation and finds out it is full of uranium, the place completely contaminated. While venturing alone, Polly is ambushed by one of Kaji's men who threatens to kill her if Joe doesn't hand them the vial. Confused by what they were asking, Joe told them that he didn't know what they were talking about. Trying to save their lives, Polly pulls out the 2 vials she had found in the scientist's lab and hands them to the men, ashamed that she hadn't told Joe sooner. Kaji's men leave the 2 in one of the abandoned chambers with an iron door and lock it from the outside. Angry at the betrayal, Joe asks her what the contents inside the vial were. Polly explains that she didn't know and that the doctor had told her the world would end if Totenkopf got his hands on them. While the 2 are arguing, a sudden sound of burning fills the room and they realize someone has lit the line leading to the mountains of dynamite kept inside. Joe realizes he must use a smaller dynamite to blow up the door before the explosion kills them all, but before can manage to do that, Kaji opens the door and lets them out. Although confused by the sight, he follows his friends who run out of the tunnel and out to safety, the explosion coming through right behind them. When the trio awakens from their accident, they find themselves naked under a comfortable sheet inside one of the temples. Suddenly, monks appear through the doors with food and water for the guests, telling them that they had burned their clothes because they were infected by the poisons in the mine. The monk orders them to leave before dark. Although the leader monk is adamant about having them leave the temple, he changes his mind when he hears that Joe and his companions are there to kill Totenkopf. The monk explained that the evil man had enslaved his people and forced them to work in the mines, watching as they slowly died from the poison. The monk then takes them to the last survivor from Totenkopf experiments, who asks to be taken out of his misery in exchange for information on where to find the evil scientist. Joe and Polly begin the journey to the place pointed out by the old man, but are forced to make a rendezvous with Commander Frankie after discovering they will soon run out of gas. Frankie greets Joe after allowing them to land, but the airstrip is soon attacked by unknown flying machines that suddenly emerge out of the ocean. While trying to get them to safety, Joe and Frankie discover that there is a hidden island right below them and assume it is Totenkopf's lair. While Frankie tries to hold the machines at bay with the amphibious squadron, Joe and Polly take his plane, attempting to sneak their way to the island. During the attack, Joe and Polly are almost killed after their plane's gear jams, but are saved by the courageous Frankie, risking her life by leading the missiles away from Joe's plane. Once they make it to the island, the duo is surprised by the dangerous large bird-like creatures of Totenkopf's creations roaming around. Finding the tunnel that leads them into the base, Joe and Polly head inside and are shocked to see what the Mad Doctor is building. Totenkopf had built an ark and had almost completed transporting all types of creatures 2 by 2 into it. Suddenly, they hear the start of the countdown and realize they have to hurry and find Totenkopf to stop him. While trying to make it into the ark, Joe and Polly are seen by the army of robots protecting the place, but are saved by Dex flying one of the transportation devices. He explains that he and some of the scientists had escaped through the tunnels once the countdown had started. The scientist with Dex explains that Totenkopf thought that humanity was doomed and wanted to start anew out in space by creating the perfect Adam and Eve, but if the ship left Earth, then the world would be incinerated. After Dex gets them to what he assumes is Totenkopf's lair, one of the escaped scientists rushes his way to the chamber but gets incinerated by the hidden device set up for security. Once Dex manages to disarm the machine, the group heads in and finds a giant library. On one of the chairs, they find the rotted body of a man and understand Toting Kopf has been dead for decades. They realize that Toting Kopf Island and all of his machines were continuing his work even after his death. Finding out that they only had 3 minutes until liftoff, Joe decides to fight the robots while Dex and the others escape. Refusing to be left behind, Polly follows Joe and rescues him just in time before Toting Kopf fasces and drops him from one of the rafts to his imminent death. Joe and Polly manage to make it into the ship right before the doors close and maneuver their way through the complicated spacecraft. Polly manages to release all the animals that had been taken into the ship into little pods back to Earth while Joe causes system failure. As the ship explodes just as it's about to leave the atmosphere, Frankie's Ready team sees Joe and Polly safely float down on one of the many pods. After Joe and Polly safely reach the ocean surrounding the island, they open the cap and marvel at what they have achieved. Polly takes out her camera and photographs Joe using her last shot of him instead of the sight in front of her. Smiling, Joe points out that she had accidentally left the cap on her lens, and with that, the movie ends.